Okay, hi everyone. We're going to start now. This webinar will be available as a recording, and if you fill in the questionnaire at the end, you also get a copy of the slides. So don't feel if you're missing this particular bit, you're missing out anything, but I'll just run quickly through what we're going to be talking about and who's on the call. So the format is I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes or so, showing you some slides from my latest Central London report. Then each of the panelists are going to have 5 minutes roughly to sort of comment on what they hear and what their perspective on that is. So we've got Liz Heath, who's obviously a LaingBuisson author and author of our self-pay report, which this webinar is focusing on, certainly for London. We've got Will Robury, who's the Chief Commercial Officer of the Cleveland Clinic. And we've got Chris Farling, who's the Commercial Director, I think that's the title, for Europe, Middle East and Africa for Reputation. And we're grateful to them as a sponsor. After that, we're going to have some Q&A. And if you want to ask a question, you should be able to see a Q&A button at the bottom. So don't put your questions in chat. Put them in Q&A, and we'll be looking at them, moderating. I'll be moderating a discussion. If you want, you can be anonymous in your questions. However, if you'd like to ask your question live, then please give us your name, put your name in, and we will call you. Jade will be in touch. Jade Cummings is running the tech side of this, and she will call you, and you can ask your question live on the web. So these are some of my thoughts on the Central London market in self-pay. My report does look at PMI International as well as self-pay, but for today we're just looking at self-pay. And before I start, I'd just like to say that many thanks to Finn for a lot of the data that I'm able to show you. They did a fantastic job of getting us, both Liz and I, some data to which we could analyze and bring some clarity, hopefully bring greater clarity into the self-pay market, not just London, but in the rest of the UK. So Jade, if I can have the first slide, please. Oh, well, there we go. I think I've done that. My report will be coming out soon on the whole market. It's now in its 8th edition. So let's talk about what we're talking about when we talk about self-pay. So we were able to take Fin data in the year to June 2021, looking at self-pay by specialty. And that's the 20,687 episodes at the bottom, probably is about 85% of the total episodes for self-pay in that year. It's about the normal amount, 2018, 2019. So it suggests it's pretty good data. And I just we'll go briefly through each one, but the interesting thing is to compare the columns as we go across. So ophthalmology, clearly the highest number of episodes as a percent of the London market, Central London market, 18% of the volume of the Central London hospitals is ophthalmology, and outside of London, it's 25%. So it's a bit of a difference, but not that much. Central London itself is within self-pay accounts for only 8% of national activity in ophthalmology. Gynecology, though, is a different story. So it's 14% of the Central London market, but only outer London hospitals, outside of London hospitals, only 3%. So that's quite a big difference. And you see that reflected in the 34%. So 34% of self-pay gynecology procedures within that specialty take place in Central London. Why that is exactly, I don't know. I suspect there's something to do with the teaching hospitals that are here and the particular specialties. It could also be, of course, that obstetrics is included in that. We have no way of knowing from this particular data what's behind it, although I will go on and talk about specialties, procedures in a minute. General surgery, about the same level of importance between Central London and out of London hospitals. But back to gastroenterology, we have a similar picture to gynecology. Gastroenterology, the Central London activity is 31% or a third of all self-pay activity in the UK. And then finally, from this point of view, trauma and orthopedics, you see the big difference. So in Central London hospitals, orthopedics is 13% by volume of activity, and outside London, it's 27%. So it really shows outside London how important orthopedics is to private hospitals and relatively less important in Central London. I think in part, Central London tends to do a lot more complex care. And so that would be a feature of that in terms of it's doing a lot of other things rather than orthopedics. It's worth mentioning sort of medical oncology is rather small in terms of its percentage of self-pay for in central London, but it's 41%. So outside London, it's suggesting they don't do a lot of self-pay medical oncology. They could be doing a lot of PMI, of course. Next slide, please, Jade. So if we look at it by procedure, so these are the top 10 procedures. You see the total is 7,748. That's only about 30% of the total number of procedures during the year. So bear that in mind. And you know, other procedures, the second most important one, so that you can bear that in mind too. But again, cataract surgery, you see that, we saw that with ophthalmology, 32% of the central London market, at least of those top 10 procedures, versus 42% outside London. Not that far different, but there you see that diagnostic upper GI endoscopy. And then similarly, we talked a bit about orthopedics. So we see primary hip replacements, much more important outside central London, 5% of the activity in central London, 16% outside of London. And if you look, you can scroll down to, as it were, to knee replacement, a similar sort of ratio, 3% to 7%. So again, it's just showing some differences there. I think I've made the point. Sorry, next slide, please, Jake. So here is some other fin data, which I think is particularly interesting. If you look over on the far right for 2018, 75-25. So a number of times I talk to hospital directors and they say, oh yes, we're going for the traditional 75-25 split between PMI and self-pay. And I go, okay, that's interesting. But actually, it doesn't really exist other than if you bundle all of England together. So going across to the left, you see in that first half of 2018, insured patients in London were 18% of the episodes versus 18% for self-pay. Slightly higher in outer London, which is interesting. So obviously the insurers have for a number of years been trying to encourage more PMI activity in outer London hospitals, believing them to be less expensive in central London. But then the rest of England, so outside the M25, the split is quite different. It's 71% PMI and 29% self-pay. So that affects, of course, where your marketing effort should be going, and obviously where you hope to attract your patients. Now, if you go down to the bottom, so this first half of 2021, you see that has changed a bit in central London, 79% to 21%. It's not a massive change. It may have changed a little, of course, in the second half of 2021. Similarly, outer London hasn't changed materially, but if you look down at the rest of England, there's quite a big change. So insured dropped from 71% to 63%, and self-pay to 29%, increasing to 37%. So it's neither good nor bad. I'm not making any value judgments on what it should be. I just want to try to make it clear what I think the relevancy of self-pay is within the overall central London market, and how this is probably different from outside London. I think Liz probably will have some more comments on that when she gives her views after this. Next slide, please, Jane. So this is each year to June 2018. It's for 2021. And so I know Finn has come out with some year to September, but we don't have this. This is a split between London and the rest of the UK. So the dark blue line at the bottom is London, and the rest of the UK is at the top. And so obviously the 2020 onwards, you see that massive dip, and it's come back. This is both PMI and self-pay activities, so that's a bit confusing. But for neither of the reasons has it come back to, would you say, above what it was before. Now, I think in the latest Fin data, self-pay looks like it had come back above in the last quarter, 2019, but PMI hadn't. So some bit of interesting data there. There's some other interesting data on PMI I'll mention in a little bit. But so it seems that numbers haven't come back as much as one might have hoped, although self-pay actually has done very well in central London, as I'll come on to. Next slide, please, Jade. So here, just out of interest, you can see the PMI volumes. The top two lines, the gray and the purple, are 2018 and 2019. And then you see in the orange what happened in 2020. So the huge dip in March, April, May, and then some recovery in the later part of 2020, but not up to the same levels. And then 2021, still down on those levels, particularly in the first part of the year. And so there is definitely a view on PMI that some insurers are thinking, well, is there a huge avalanche of claims about to be made or coming through the system, and they're all looking at it, do they have to give some money back to their subscribers or their customers because they haven't claimed and they haven't been able to claim? So that's an ongoing issue. And Jade, the next slide. Thanks. So that's just to show the same colors for the same years, the same effect on 2020 in the orange line dropping for April, May, and coming back in July and getting back to normal towards the end of last year. End of 2020, my apologies. And then early 2021, again, starting well below the norm of 2018, 2019, and then recovering to be higher than that. So I think that has continued. I think we'll find that self-pay has grown, and I'll show you some stats in a second about that. And I think we'll also, I'm sure we'll end up talking about why exactly that's grown to some extent, but I won't spoil that conversation just now. But next slide, please, Jade. So I just want to put this one in because this was the most recent Fin data, and I know that I'm often on the cautious side, or cautiously optimistic, and maybe that's right, maybe that's wrong. But if you look at the London data, its increase in activity was 7%. We're talking volume here rather than value. There's lots of discussion about average revenue per case actually being higher than it has been previously for self-pay and in the PMI, that people are arriving sicker. But you see that 7% compared to all the other regions, they're 30% plus. So again, the story, I think, is different in central London. And though while it has grown, it hasn't grown to the extent that it has in the regions, shall we call them. Okay, thank you, Jade. Next slide, please. Okay, so here my update on my forecast for all of you who came to the conference last year. It's a slide update for all of you who are going to come to the conference in October. You're very welcome. This is where we present the latest numbers. And if you look at PMI for 2019, 865 million. This is just for independent hospitals. PPUs I'm excluded from this analysis for today. I think they really suffered, to be honest. We can talk a bit about that too. Some of them have done all right coming back, and others I think are struggling, particularly if they are based in hospitals that have A&Es departments. So fell quite a lot in 2020, came back in 2021, and I think will grow a little bit more in 2022, but still not back to 2019 levels. I'll just go on to Embassy and make the same point. So dropped dramatically in 2020, and then it come back, but still not back to 2019 levels. It's coming, the pipeline's growing. People are reasonably confident that it'll come back. It's just fun enough, sometimes I think we forget to imagine how we look to countries abroad. And a lot of people think we still have a lot of COVID. We've only recently come off the red list for some countries in the Middle East. So these things will take time. And then back to self-pay. So self-pay was sort of the third payer group in the London market in 2019, and it fell, of course, in 2020, and now I think it's come back and boomed. So 2021 overall, I'm expecting turn out of about 14% increase in revenues. So obviously there's been a big decrease in NHS. I put in 10% there expected. It's probably going to be between 5 and 10% of the total. People are doing sort of contracts, but not anything at tariff. But I think they'll keep doing that, awaiting list initiatives for the NHS. And then I've said, and maybe I'm a bit cautious of this for 2022, this year, maybe 5% growth overall, so another 14% or so in self-pay. But my sense is there's a lot of capacity issues, mainly around staffing, and that's going to be problematic for people and actually delivering the care, even if the demand is there. So last slide, Jade. And there, just to put this into context about, I've been mentioning this for a number of years, and it's great to have Will on the call because he can talk about it particularly. But the impact of the new openings, we've got Nuffield at Barts, John Lizzie's was putting some put some new theaters in. King Edward has expanded with a new theater and new diagnostic and imaging center across the street. And Cleveland Clinic clearly have opened a brand new and quite large and indeed gleaming, I may say, thanks to my recent tour, hospital with 184 beds and 29 ITU beds, not to mention, I think it's 41 neuro rehab beds. So there's a big increase in capacity, and I think that'll make it a very interesting time, if you like, about people, for all of the hospital operators chasing that self-pay growth, as well as trying to get their PMI business back up to where it was, as well as the embassy. So it's a lot of stats, and I'm sure people will have questions about them later. I think I'm going to go to, just to say, all the slide deck and on-demand recording will be shared with those people who registered from tomorrow. My report's coming out. That's a plug. It's coming out soon. I think Liz's self-pay report is already coming out. We also have one coming out on health cover. So keep in contact with us, and if you have any specific questions on when it'll come out, feel free to let me know. And then I think Jade, if I think you can ask you to invite Liz to take the microphone, and Liz, I look forward to your comments.
Ted, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Very pleased to be with you this morning. Ted set out the picture in London and some of the rest of the UK. I think one of the things that we're keen to understand is the drivers for self-pay. My background is in the NHS and independent sector, and as you know, I write the self-pay report for the rest of the UK. And clearly, at the moment, the primary driver is most definitely NHS waiting times. We hear that from people we talk to, our own research, and also some recent research by Finn suggested that during the last year or so, a number of people had used the independent sector for the first time when they previously would have used NHS services. And I think that's a really important factor for the sector to grasp, that we have many, many people who are exploring private healthcare, whether through private GPs right through to complex surgery for the very first time. And how we connect with those people is going to be absolutely vital in the future. So I don't have much more to say. I'm really happy to field questions with the rest of the panel, but the self-pay market for me is most definitely on the up.
Sorry, Jade, I think we've got a Will.
Thanks, Ted. So just to introduce myself, so Will Rowbury, Chief Commercial Officer for Cleveland Clinic London. I look after our relationships with private medical insurers, responsible for the international business, business development strategy, marketing and communications, and I sit on the executive team. Just thought it'd be helpful, given we have recently opened, as Ted said, just to give a little bit of an overview of Cleveland Clinic London, a little bit around Cleveland Clinic overall, just to kind of set the context of what we're doing and what we've recently opened. So we could go to the next slide, please. So we're a 100-year-old organization founded in 1921, celebrated our centenary last year, and opening our hospital in London for the next 100 years of Cleveland Clinic. We're consultant-led, so what does that mean? So all of our CEOs in all of our locations are clinicians. Brian Donnelly, the CEO here, an orthopedic surgeon. Tom Mihailovich, the global CEO, is a cardiothoracic surgeon. And what that does is it drives all our decision-making around the patient. We're not for profit, so we don't have shareholders. So any surplus we do make is reinvested into research and education. So some of the unique factors around Cleveland Clinic. Next slide, please. Just in terms a little bit about our scale. So we have with about 12.4 billion revenue. We have 21 hospitals across the world. Big footprint in Ohio, where we were founded, large footprint in Florida, a large hospital in Abu Dhabi, and now London as part of our globally integrated healthcare system. And we have over 72,000 caregivers, which are our employees. Caregivers, because everyone within the organization is very much responsible for delivering care, and we see that as part of our ethos. Next slide, please. I've been very fortunate to have some great international recognition. So #1 in cardiology and heart surgery in the US for the 26 consecutive years, and a number of other accolades in other disciplines, and recently voted again #2 hospital in the world by Newsweek, which is an international ranking of healthcare organizations. And next slide. So a little bit about our footprint in London. So we opened our first facility, 24 Portland Place, back in September of last year, so just over 6 months ago. And then our main hospital actually opened just over 3 weeks ago on the 29th of March. So early days in terms of trends, but we've seen high volume of self-pay relevant to this conversation within the Portland Place location, and we're on the managed ramp up for the hospital, but seemingly demand for the services, and looking forward to the discussion. So I'll pass back to Chris.
Thanks, Will. Sorry, and thanks also, Liz. Of course, apologies if I didn't do that. And welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you, everyone. And yeah, nice to have this opportunity to talk on a webinar. My name is Chris Farling. I'm the CX Strategy Director for Reputation. Ultimately, my career has been mainly spent helping businesses across many different sectors use customer and patient feedback to make business decisions that ultimately help you grow and help you keep loyal customers or patients. I've been with Reputation about 18 months. Reputation is a Silicon Valley-based software business. We have a Liverpool-based UK office, although as like many businesses in today's world, we offer a very remote workforce. I'm actually based in South Derbyshire. Our platform ultimately is a one-stop shop for feedback. We allow hundreds of thousands of users to log into our online platform to effectively manage at scale customer and patient feedback in order to help them grow. So we have a layer of data science within our platform that helps you analyze customer sentiment that drives this decision-making and action, and you're able to track it online. Our history, our Reputation is actually kind of started from an online reputation management basis. We actually started by helping individuals manage their online reputation, and we quickly developed into helping businesses do that. Why is this really important today? I think kind of from the report that Ted's talked through and the rapid growth in self-pay, businesses' online reputation becomes more and more important as consumers, patients are looking for services. We are seeing across every industry a huge increase in review volume online, and the fact that consumers and patients are now reading online sentiment before they're making business choices. So ultimately that is one area of how we help businesses. We help businesses get found. We have patented technology that is quite closely linked into how Google's search algorithm works. And Google, for those that don't know, actually really cares about how businesses treat and react to customer sentiment and feedback. So the better you look online, the better you will return in search. So when patients are looking online for local services, if your sentiment is good, if you're responding to reviews, you will return higher in search rankings. So that's one of our key pillars, is we help businesses get found online. We have a single metric that helps every business at every level understand their customer sentiment. And we're seeing that. We've seen kind of a 5-time fold in healthcare customer reviews over the last couple of years, and actually it expedited out the back of COVID. So, you know, huge changes in healthcare, but across every industry, it's just becoming more and more important. So, yeah, really interested to see how the conversation goes, and hopefully I can add some input and value. But I'll pass it back, Ted, to you, I think.
Chris, thanks very much. Liz and Will, if you could turn your mics on, thanks very much. Maybe we can, so if people want to ask questions, we've had a couple in the Q&A, and I'm just going to take chair's prerogative at the moment and ask mine first. But feel free to add in questions, and you can also vote on those questions, I believe, a bit like Slido. But if I can pick up this point Chris has just mentioned, and particularly first to Liz and then Will, just this point about patient journeys starting online, and also within that, you know, a lot of people talk about, well, is the consultant is the brand, or is the hospital the brand, or is indeed is the insurer the brand. But in case of self-pay, that's not so relevant. But I just wonder if you noticed anything different, Liz, in your chats to people from the basis of your self-pay report. And Will, I don't know if you know this, but or you would know the answer to this, but presumably not everyone who goes to the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio is from Cleveland. So people must be starting their journey outside of Cleveland. And so I'm interested in taking that knowledge and what your plans are for in London about how to attract patients. And then maybe Chris, you can respond after they've each given their comments.
Okay, Ted. So I'll pick up on, you know, how people navigate their way through. I think Chris is absolutely right. I think that digital is a very useful portal to consider now. And certainly when we were doing the self-pay report, it so happens that the Ofcom report on digital usage came out, and the over 55s are now the fastest growing group of internet users. And coincidentally, they tend to form the core of self-pay for orthopedics and cataracts. So it makes sense that people are seeking their initial information online. I think it's also worth noting that outside London, localism does seem to trump a brand or seeking an attractive price 30, 50 miles away. So people do tend to support their local private hospital. That's where they're looking. And I think that there are understandable reasons for that. And we have also noticed that many providers are now offering things like live chat, portals into their own services that can then start to support people on the self-pay pathway. And I come back to the comment I made earlier, that many people are now starting a private healthcare journey who had never done that before. In the self-pay report, we gathered some data from various other sources around the volume of people actually going online or visiting certain websites, and Private Healthcare UK saw their traffic grow substantially through 2020, through 2021, and very much more into the beginning of 2022. So a lot more people are out there seeking information about private healthcare. Many of those will be self-pay.
Thanks, Liz. Will, do you have some thoughts from Cleveland or Victoria?
Yeah, I think if you look at it from a Cleveland Clinic perspective in the US, it is very different. Obviously, as I said, we have a 100-year history, and it is a very well recognized brand in the US. You know, number 2 hospital, number 1 Mayo, they're really big brands. So anyone in that country, you know, it's synonymous with delivering the highest quality healthcare. And I think from a travel perspective, that catchment is very wide because of our ability to treat the most complex patients ultimately. So that's almost a kind of global population of patients who will travel to Cleveland Clinic. We have patients that come from across the US because of the center of excellence in cardiac and other disciplines. So there is a broad catchment, but obviously it's a full service healthcare system that serves every aspect of healthcare to the local population of Ohio. But we have a big draw both from the national population and internationally. I think when you look at London, it is a very, very different market. And then the UK as a whole, as you've said, showing those trends is a very different market. I think here, we will build that brand, and we'll be focused on building the brand of Cleveland Clinic and as an extension of our global brand and what we're known for. But we have to build that trust in a local market, because the referral mechanisms are different, patient preferences, the relationship with the NHS is different. I think I would just agree with what Liz said. It's actually a very, there's a changing market, and there are more and more people who are looking to potentially use private healthcare, and we need to service that and give them access and understand what they can expect when they come to our facilities, how we can make that access as easy as possible, how we can make it as transparent as possible. Understand, I think there probably is sometimes a hesitance around the cost and understanding what the cost would be. So I think, like any, I guess, consumer proposition, being really focused on the needs of those patients and ultimately supporting them at a time when, it's a time of need, when people are looking to receive healthcare, they need that empathy. So I think there's a real focus on how we manage that kind of new and growing customer base in the self-pay market. In terms of facility-led, consultant-led, I think it's just a myriad of different avenues that people come to find care. I think it's still in London, it is very consultant-led, but I think brands will grow as it becomes more of a proposition where people seek out care, whereas previously they just had tried and tested pathways through their GP. So I think it's a changing landscape. I hope that answers your question.
We might come back to it. Well, sir, Chris, there is a question directly towards you or toward Reputation. What percentage of patients in a hospital leave a review with Reputation? And I don't know if you can have any of that data. I know you do work with some private hospitals in the UK, but or from other industries or similar industries.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a common question and a valid one. I think the answer is it kind of depends. It depends on how you're prioritizing it, how you're actually soliciting it as well. So it can range from, a natural, low percentage up to, 10, 15, 20% of total patients, depending on, the strategy and the importance that business is putting around it. Naturally, our view is, online reviews help you grow the business because it has a direct impact into how easily you're found and how getting people through the front door ultimately. But actually, to really understand patient experience, you need more than just review feedback. You need to understand feedback when you're actually directly, maybe surveying them or listening on social channels, or listening to contact centers. So, it's not one source of feedback. Customers want to talk to you in many different ways. So designing programs that help you listen across the board is really important. There are multiple ways of driving additional feedback as well. In fact, one area that we've helped a lot of businesses across different industries, it is actually linking, some of our technology links surveys directly into reviews. So when you get that first party feedback with the customer's permission, you can ask them to leave a review. So you're not only learning directly from their feedback, but then you're sharing it online and helping you grow. And we've seen up to 20% increase in review volume by doing that. Customers like to give you the feedback, but then if you make it easy for them to share that publicly, they're happy to do that. So I don't have an exact number, but it kind of depends on the strategy that hospital, that clinic is running. Organic feedback on reviews can be quite polarized. Some review feedback tends to be either really positive, really negative, and that's why supplemented with soliciting other feedback from other channels can really help you understand real true customer sentiment, and then you can share that to boost your online review feedback as well.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Jed, I'm going to go to Mark Lenfield's question. I don't know if you can get him to ask it live. There are a couple of questions around why is self-pay growing? Why aren't people just taking out more PMI? And I think there's some answers some ability to answer that. But if Mark is online, do you want to turn on your camera and your microphone, Mark? Or maybe Jade needs to lay just the microphone. No, Mark, okay. Thanks for the question. Why don't we answer the question anyway? So the question was, I'll read it out. Not sure if I understood correctly, but it seems the insured payers' share is decreasing. Sorry, Jade, does Mark come back on? No. Why is that, especially outside London? Shouldn't the long NHS waiting list give a boost to private health insurers? So I'll give it a little bit for central London, and maybe Jade and others can comment outside of London. I think they're not sure, actually. The insurers aren't really sure why these people haven't been coming back, as they've already paid for it, or their employers have already paid for it. There does seem to be a little bit in London of, well, I'm not going into London anymore. I was actually at an insurer's office and went to the canteen. Admittedly, it was a Friday, and the place is empty. And I said, what's your policy on people coming back to work? And they said, oh, we're absolutely clear. They have to come back 1 day a week. And you go, okay. You know, so the number, that's not just insurers, that's sort of large parts of the city and probably in the West End. So that's part of it. I still don't think it's come back completely. And I think some of the insurers are thinking there is just going to be this avalanche of PMI claims. So Liz, I don't know if you've got a different perspective from outside London.
I have a perspective, Ted, yes. I think corporate paid PMI has held up relatively well over the last few years. The decline has been in personally paid PMI. And if we look at the demographics, we've got a bubble of people who are older and still active, but are not now prepared to pay the premiums. Premiums can be very, very high if you are older and going in for the first time. There are some more budget schemes out there, but they don't necessarily give you the full cover for things like cancer, which is a key concern and one of the drivers for people saying that they take personally paid PMI. It's also not straightforward. What we are seeing is a lot of people mixing and matching. So even those who have some form of private medical insurance may choose not to make a claim, but self-fund maybe their knee replacement, which is a big ticket item, on the basis that it may preserve some of the other elements of their cover. And also this mix and match approach runs right through. The people are picking up private GP consultations, but not necessarily going through to diagnostics or having diagnostics, not going through to treatment, or going straight in for treatment, but then reverting to the NHS for other things. So I don't think the concept of PMI as a coverall is quite the same as it would have been a number of years ago. And I think we probably need to recognise that where the bulk of the self-pay demand is for things where NHS waits are really long, which is orthopaedics and cataracts. You know, we still have 23,000 people waiting over 2 years for some sorts of surgery, and that is not shifting anytime soon. And if you already have a pre-existing condition, you're probably not going to take out PMI for it because there may be a moratorium of a year on it. So you might self-fund, but you then may choose to take out some form of protection for the future. You know, people like Saga offer some very good policies for older people that cover certain things. And I'm sure they're very active in the space. I mean, all insurers are being quite active at the moment in terms of promoting the benefits of having some cover. And I noticed there was a question about mental health. That is also something that the insurers are promoting quite heavily at the moment in terms of health and well-being.
Thanks, Liz. We'll come to you second. On the mental health question, it's not covered by FIN, so the data isn't available and tends to be dealt with by different providers, i.e. not acute hospital providers. So that's why we haven't covered it in this discussion. Jade, I'm going to come to Lawrence's question, Lawrence Metham's question in a minute, but Will, you must be out talking to the insurers. Do you feel they have a sense, you get a sense from them of why it seems people aren't coming back into town, at least? And indeed, is that correct?
Yeah, no, certainly talking to them. I think overall from their book of business, they have seen growth, and I think your numbers stop in mid 2021, which I think if you think around obviously the course of the pandemic, we haven't really seen any kind of normalization, I'd say, of what a post-pandemic world looks like in terms of commuter habits, what London looks like. So I think there's still a little bit of a way to go to kind of understand exactly how habits might have changed. But overall, and this is anecdotal, but also through some of their publicly reported numbers, they have seen a growth across the board in terms of PMI. I think corporates, certainly with our conversations, place a greater importance on that and access for their employees for PMI. Obviously, given the context of the last 2 years, and then as Liz has referenced, there is a long wait list for many routine procedures in the NHS, and therefore making sure they have an active, fit, healthy workforce is critically important for the economic sustainability of those organisations. So I think PMI has a really strong role to play, and I think, like you said, it comes down to providing the right access, the right level of service. People, I think, more willing to travel into central London for complex procedures and the inpatient work and surgical cases, maybe looking more locally for certain things like outpatient diagnostic. But I think it's probably too early to say, and certainly too early to say in our in our activity, given we've only recently opened. But I think it's just some thoughts that I think it's probably too early to call it at the moment. But I think PMI has a really important role to play going forward, just given the focus on access to healthcare overall in this country, given what's happened in the last couple of years.
I have heard, Chris, I'm going to come back to you with a different question, but I have heard that actually PMI is growing. There's sort of a war for talent out there amongst a lot of London firms, and because of the COVID, people are asking, well, what PMI cover do I get? So I think there's a suspicion, at least, of, well, more than a suspicion, that the numbers of people taking PMI will have grown. That doesn't completely explain why people with existing PMI haven't appeared to be claiming, at least not in central London. So there's some mixed messages that are coming out of that. Chris, there are 2 questions for you. One from Lawrence Metten is, can Chris give a broad and brief overview of any other strategies or methods that are employed to improve reputation apart from reviews and SEO? And the second is related to it from Abhishek Roy, saying, can Reputation's platform be integrated to the existing legacy review systems of the hospitals, or is it a total replacement of existing review system? And is the collected data the property of the hospital concerned, or is it also used by Reputation for any benchmarking? They're not exactly the same question, to be honest.
Yeah.
But 2 questions related to some of the stuff around.
No, great questions. I love the broad and brief one. So in terms of what can businesses, strategies to improve reputation apart from reviews and SEO, I think I kind of touched on that earlier. The first bit is about the listening strategy. Are you listening to feedback across the whole patient journey? And that can take quite a while to really plan and implement. But in honesty, that's the easy bit. In order to really improve reputation, you've got to work on the culture within the organization. There's actually I'm pretty sure most people have heard of Net Promoter Score, because I'm sure that's used within healthcare as well. The inventor of Net Promoter Score, a guy called Fred Reichout, he's just released a new book called Winning on Purpose, or With Purpose. Just finished it actually this morning. He talks about the challenge of the adoption of Net Promoter Score, because it became just a score. And actually, to improve any patient experience or reputation, you can't just measure the score, you've got to do something with it. And you've really got to think about what's driving the experience and put the right plans in place and create the right culture within a business to listen and react and change based on what patients are saying. So I really recommend that book. It goes into loads of great examples from different industries about what businesses have done. And actually those that have a patient or customer focus there's a clear link to their growth and profitability. So yeah, I think that I'd steer people towards reading his book. And there's lots of stuff online around it as well. The second question,
around data, do you need to?
Yeah, integration. So I mean, we have API direct integrations into hundreds of review sites. So if you've got specific review sites you would like us to pull in, then just we're happy to have that conversation, see if it's one that we already do. If we don't, we can integrate into them. We also then do lots of custom integrations into internal systems as well. But we're a tech business, so we get our tech people to talk, and we can generally integrate things. And therefore some businesses will use our platform to respond to things, but some businesses want their own CRM system, Salesforce, things like that they can use to respond as well. Is the data collected by the property, is it also used for benchmarking by reputation? So we create our own benchmarks on industries, but it's based on publicly available data. So when we create for a hospital or a trust a reputation score, that is based on public data about that hospital or trust. We will then go and benchmark the rest of the industry so you can see how you compare to that industry. So it's all public data. We don't own it. We just bring it in and we analyze it and we share you the insights. Any solicited data that we collect on your behalf is we're just the data processors of it. We don't own it. It's your data we're collecting on behalf of you. So hopefully that helps.
Okay, thanks, Chris. There are a couple anonymous questions which I'll compile, which I think it's a combination of, well, yes, NHS waiting lists are important, but what about the economy, as they say? It's we've got a lot of people, even the people that might normally feel that they could pay for private healthcare, they may not feel confident right now because the oil energy prices are going up and the economy seems a bit more wobbly than normal, partly due to Ukraine, partly perhaps other factors. So I don't know, Liz, I'm going to throw it to you first, but do you get a sense of NHS waiting list? Yes, but the economy also is important. And where would you think you'd come down on either of those?
Yeah,
Will, you're next, by the way.
Yeah, okay. So if we look back quite a long way, the macroeconomic situation has always had a bit of an impact on self-pay, and that's perfectly understandable. If we go back a long way, when waiting times were very, very long and the economics might not have been great, actually self-pay boomed. So I think if we look back a long way, we can say that there is, for individuals, they are making personal decisions based on their own circumstances, whatever the macro situation. And I think the macro situation does have an influence, but if we look at the core of the self-pay activity around the two specialties of orthopedics and ophthalmology, those tend to be older people. Many of them had their adventure before dementia somewhat curtailed through 2020 and early 2021. And many of those are telling providers that that's why they chose to do their joint replacement or whatever, because they want to go back to those sorts of activities. They are also, there are large parts of that demographic that have a lot of savings, or a lot of savings that aren't earning much money for them or haven't been until recently. So they have chosen to make personal spending decisions, weighing up all the different factors. And we also have in that demographic people who have generous pensions, still index linked, and savings and assets in property. So for particularly some areas, there are people who have assets that they can either use or income and savings that they can get at. And they are choosing to make those decisions. They are personally weighing up their own well-being and uncertainty. And I wouldn't underplay the value of the uncertainty. If you know your operation is going to be in 3 months, then you can plan around that. If you don't know when your consultation, your preoperative assessment or your operation is actually going to be, for many people, that's one of the big decision-making factors, and they're weighing that up against the cost of treatment. And also we have another factor that wasn't at play a number of years ago, which is the ability to spread the cost of treatment, in many cases interest-free, over a reasonable period. And we know from what providers are telling us that a number of people are choosing to do that, even if they could afford to pay upfront. They're choosing to spread the cost because that suits their own personal spending and budgeting situations. So I think there are a number of factors at play. I don't think the economic situation has hit big time yet, but I think we do need to be aware of it as a factor over the next year or so.
Well, do you have a sense? I mean, Cleveland Clinic, like any investor, must have looked at a lot of different economic scenarios as to, you know, should they build or should they not, and how might it affect patient revenues? Do you have a sense of the importance of the economics?
Yeah, I mean, I think as Liz said, it's always going to be a factor, but I think the one area Liz didn't talk about, I completely agree with the kind of an older demographic, but also you have people of working age who, you know, their health and well-being is directly correlated to their ability to be economically active and earn money. And I think in a situation where, you know, having this conversation with someone very recently, you're unable to work and unable to carry out your job because you have that uncertainty and you have the inability to work for whatever particular reason, physically, or it's inhibiting your ability to, then I think people's mindset might have shifted into the fact that they need to use more of their disposable income to focus on health and well-being, rather than typically waiting for the NHS treatment that now is, you know, there are longer wait times for something that wouldn't be seen as necessarily an urgent operation, but it is urgent if it's impacting your ability to work. And I think, you know, there's several trends in society of more and more people being self-employed. There's more of the, you know, talk of the gig economy. You talk of people, you know, not necessarily having that comfort of the corporate PMI, and therefore that would lead them down a route of being more, I guess, self-insured and choosing to use self-pay as an option to get themselves back fit and well so that they can work and provide for their personal circumstances. Would just be the additional point I'd make. But, you know, I think the economic environment will always have a factor. But again, I'd go back to the point that I think healthcare, in terms of its prominence and access to healthcare, has just stepped up a level in the last 2 years in people's psyche, because, you know, regardless of how you access healthcare, privately insured, self-pay, actually, a lot of people couldn't even access routine healthcare because of the pandemic. And I think that will have a long-lasting impression on people's importance of that access going forward.
Certainly, when I've looked at the private medical insurance market over the last few years, corporate has sort of more or less stayed steady, but individual has really declined. And one of the reasons we kept thinking about that was because people just put the money into ISAs, you know, and they save it for a rainy day, and if they never need it, then they can either spend it on healthcare or a cruise or their children's university. But I'm sure that's still a factor. How much that is working through the system, I don't know. Chris, there was a question which 3 people have voted for. Which review site do you think is best?
Yeah. So, I mean, there are obviously quite a few in healthcare. You know, I Want Great Care and the WebMD review sites. We see quite a lot of activity on there. I would say, you know, in North America, we work quite heavily in healthcare and have done for a number of years, and the healthcare system is a lot different to here. But obviously, from what we're seeing today in the self-pay market, you know, we naturally see a lot of reviews across different sites. The one key one, and this is the same across every industry, is becoming Google. Or if it isn't Google, it will be Google very soon, because that is ultimately, Google kind of owns the internet. That's where everyone starts their journey. And I think just have a look at your own business and see how review volume is changing over time on Google. We are seeing kind of 5 times uplift year on year in some industries and sectors, and healthcare being part of it. Actually, it's 5 times in the last 3 years in healthcare in the UK on Google. So your presence on Google, and Google does actually look at other sites. So in its algorithm, it wants you to have good sentiment across the web. So it will look at not only, you know, other review sites, but your presence on social media as well. So, you know, Facebook, you know, if you're using social media as well, that also counts and impacts on Google. So my advice would be to make sure you are listening and responding and reacting to feedback across all of the industry specific ones, but, you know, really think about your presence on Google, because that's gonna be the future if it isn't already. Thanks,
Chris. A couple of questions on pediatric self-pay inside or outside London. I don't know if Liz, you've had any time to think about it. I'm not sure I have. So I'm going to ask you first.
We don't specifically research pediatrics, particularly because outside London it's not a huge factor for self-pay. But what I would say, the proliferation of private GP services, particularly those based outside London in private hospitals, we are seeing those being used by families as a quick route into some reassurance, an opinion, maybe a few investigations. And there has been growth in ENT, which generally, you know, there is a large pediatric element to that. But in terms of pediatric as a non-surgical specialty, I'm not aware of any particular self-pay spikes anywhere.
Will, are you guys going to do pediatrics?
It's not in the plan at the moment, and it's not in our service offering. Maybe something focusing on the main hospital at present, but maybe down the line. But yeah, in terms of from the self-pay market, it's not something we have a particular view on as we're not providing that service.
I think some time ago I did some work and I thought pediatrics was maybe 10% of the central London market. You know, it's mainly the Portland and Great Ormond Street, particularly complex specialties, which kids are flown in from overseas to be treated, and then the Portland less complex, and beyond that, Cromwell does some, but you know, the requirements of safeguarding and other things around pediatrics means that very few hospitals actually do them, because you have to do them to such a high standard. So I'm just looking at we talked, Liz, someone's asked about statistics for cardiovascular diagnostic testing, and I don't think we have anything to that level, but maybe we can pick up a point which we haven't really had the statistics for, but you've mentioned it, is this point about mixing and matching. You know, I also have seen that there's a lot of, when people say, oh yeah, the self-pay is really growing, and I go, is it outpatients and diagnostics? I go, well, yeah, actually. So, you know, there's quite a lot of that. And then people often go back into, and funny enough, I was surprised, I may say, about it was a Spire story, which I read in the national press. And the quote for the patient was, they were on a long waiting list, I believe it was Southampton, for something cardiac. And they went private for a diagnostic, and the same, as it were, the same consultant saw them and said, yes, you need to move up the waiting list. And they went back on the NHS, having had their diagnostic on Spire. And I thought, I'm not sure why Spire was making that story. And I'm sure there's a reason, but that seemed to be a perfect example of things which are great in one respect for private hospital operators. They get the imaging and the diagnostics, but they don't get the treatment or procedures. Do you have any? Can you add anything? Do you have a different perspective on that, of, you know, how self-pay people are treating private hospitals?
Do you want me to pick that one up?
Yeah, I don't know if it's any different from what you've said before, but maybe if you can expand on it a little.
I think you're absolutely right that certainly as we came out of 2020 and the lockdown, there was a huge volume of pent-up demand, and a lot of that was seeking consultations and diagnostics. And I would class that as seeking reassurance. Mm-hmm. So I want to know that either what I'm worried about is something I really need to worry about, or whether it's something that I can sit back and wait for the system to to get to me. And I think if we look at data from the imaging, the standalone imaging providers, they saw a massive spike in activity. So, yes, PMI, but predominantly self-pay. And again, this is maybe more affordable. So the package of having a consultation and or let's say an MRI scan to get an answer is perhaps a lot more affordable for many people than thinking, well, I need to find the money for a cholecystectomy or a knee replacement or whatever. So I think a lot of it is around reassurance. A lot of it is because even getting as far as a consultant referral has been difficult. We can't ignore the issues in primary care and the demand management that the local commissioners have been working through in order to better manage the people who are already on a pathway. And I actually think many patients are getting quite smart to this. They're realizing that actually the process may not take them directly to where they want to go, which is to a consultant referral, a letter back saying, yes, you've got X and you will need to wait for it, but you needn't worry about it. So they are taking matters into their own hands. I did wonder whether this was just a big spike in 2021 and whether it would be sustained, but I think there's still a lot of that. And I do think it's around better affordability at that level, but also understanding what the problem is. And I hadn't heard the Spire story, but for that individual, knowing something that actually was more urgent than perhaps they'd originally thought, kind of illustrates that individuals can use the process to get the reassurance or the planned treatment that they need.
Thanks, Liz. Will, I've got a question for you, and it's related. That I've said in one of my reports, and so certainly in some of my articles, that not necessarily just self-pay, but PMI too. But when hospitals get inquiries, it seems to me easier for standalone hospitals. I'm not trying to make this a soft question at all. For standalone hospitals, where someone can take the inquiry and either email or telephone and book someone right into the software to see someone that afternoon. And if they can't book them that afternoon, they'll say, well, you can come tomorrow and see so-and-so. And the patient or the prospective patient goes, no, I want to see someone today. So they might take a book, say, yes, I'll book for tomorrow, but actually then they pick up the phone and call other people. So it feels like to some extent patients are hot, if that's the right word. So I'm interested in you guys for Cleveland Clinic. You're coming at it fresh, without legacy. You planned on having office space as well as the hospital. So how are you guys addressing that type of inquiry, and is it a valid one that all self-pay hire inquiries are hot to that extent?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to any proposition to a consumer or a customer, and patients are in that category, that they want speed of access, as you said, potentially same-day booking. And same-day booking isn't just seeing one person, but potentially having some of your diagnostics on the same day. So minimizing your touch points with the healthcare system. And I think I feel the way we look at it here is that's universal across PMI. So PMI customers, it's around time, minimizing people's time. I think minimal touch points across different elements of the system. I think the unique advantage I believe we have at Cleveland Clinic is obviously we have an employed consultant base as well. So we have really strong visibility over the planning and the schedules of our consultants because they're full-time employed to Cleveland Clinic. And therefore we can provide that access, and we can provide access to other individuals in the hospital where they have spare capacity on that day. And we've seen that model work very well, where an individual comes in for a consultation, and instead of booking them for a different consultation with a different specialist in the following week, that specialist is in our facility already, and we can find a slot that works. So minimizing the touch point to a half day of interactions rather than potentially multiple hour-long interactions across different sites. So I think that's something we're really focused on, and is the power of having a kind of group practice, multidisciplinary team model, that you have all of those, all of those kind of individuals and visibility over their scheduling and timing, so that you can provide that better level of customer service, which I think, everyone is time poor. Certainly in London, it feels like everyone is very time poor, so they want to minimize those touch points, and we can pull that together. And then I think second point, just from a kind of customer interaction, we have our electronic patient record, which is integrated within 80 applications within the hospital. So that provides a portal for people to access their healthcare information. Again, something not unique to have an electronic patient record, but that integration of all your tests, your diagnostics immediately uploaded with notes from the consultant. You're not waiting for letters. That point Liz has made around certainty, you have very quick reassurance around what your results are. You're not waiting in limbo for someone to read your scan, report it, come back to you, and you're waiting for that to come through. So it's not only instant access up front, but actually access to the results and a treatment plan and what the next steps are to enable you to then either have that comfort or assess what your options are going forward. So it's something we've very much focused on in our model, and I think it's something you can continuously improve. It's healthcare is complex, so it's challenging putting all those pieces together in any environment, but that's something we're really focused on as we come into the market.
Ted,
okay, but
I just add a little bit more context as well, just on that conversation. I mean, I think we started this webinar, talking about the fact that waiting time in the NHS is the clear driver to the rise in self-pay. We actually did a short study on the industry at the end of last year based on review feedback to understand what's driving positive and negative sentiment in healthcare. And the number one, well, the two big drivers of negative sentiment were billing and waiting time. So whilst waiting time provides the opportunity, as Will said, unless you're able to manage expectation and have the right process, can easily become the challenge as well. And I think as well within the report, where we see demand in and out of London is slightly different across different types of treatment as well, really understanding patient sentiment and where the pain points are in the customer patient journey is really important for businesses to be able to really kind of utilize this opportunity. It's a clear opportunity in the market, but unless you're listening and understanding how it impacts your business across the UK, you can't really win.
But so we've got about 7 minutes left, but Chris, can I come back to you on that though? So first of all, what do you mean by billing? Presumably then that's just private healthcare, and on the access or waiting list, is it the person bringing up hot and saying they want an appointment the next day, or is it that they get the appointment and then the procedure is a week later and that frustrates them? Or what? It's a broad term, sort of waiting time, but what does it mean? And similarly, billing, was it priced before they paid for the procedure, or was it after they paid for the procedure?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to share the full report to give you that granularity. But I mean, waiting time ultimately was around like how they had expectation that going private would get them the treatment quicker, and actually it wasn't. Now, so that can, if we're not listening, if you're not listening, then to that type of feedback, then the opportunity is there, but maybe not fulfilled.
Yeah, and I think Ted, just on the billing point, I'd add, I think it's a lot of it. I'm sure Liz, you've looked at this for a number of years. Is just around the transparency. It's quite certainly people want to come in and know the self-funding what the cost is. It's not open-ended. Obviously, healthcare is a complex business, so making sure we can be as transparent as possible into what that care pathway is going to cost and where the limitations are and what's included, what's not. I think again that's universal across self-pay. Private medical insurance is one of the number one sources of complaints that people don't fully understand. The product that they have or the product they're receiving, and then they receive an expected bill, which on the margins could be hugely significant for their own personal finances. So making sure that they can go in fully understanding what that care pathway would cost.
So presumably Cleveland Clinic issues one bill, i.e. not a separate one for the consultant and the anaesthetist and everything else.
Correct, yeah. So the ability to minimize the touch points for our employed consultants is one bill. It's consolidated. You don't have a bill from the consultant, potentially a bill from an anaesthetist. It can all be packaged, which I think again in a small way will minimize those touch points, and it'll help the understanding of the consumer of what they're paying for.
So Chris, last question, because we're running out of time, but just to drill down a little bit further. So the question of outcomes, like how good was the procedure? How did the patient feel they were treated in the hospital and being sent home, and could they do the things that they want to, like see or walk, and versus could they see the consultant at the time they wanted to, when they wanted to right away? How are those related, do you think, if at all, in patient or consumer minds? Because is there a relationship, or is it completely different?
In terms of their overall outcome of their experience?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, well, I think the first ones that you mentioned are kind of the outcome measures. Did what I go in to have done, did it work? But along the way, there are many different touch points, such as waiting time, such as interaction with any of the colleagues that they've dealt with. They all have an influence on that outcome. And using science, you can understand the level of importance of those things. Ease is a common theme that's growing a lot in different industries. Customers, patients just want experiences to be easy. They don't want it to be painful. So actually measuring the level of ease, like how difficult was this for me to interact with you as a business, is often the key driver to loyalty. So they're likely to use you again if it might have been a lot lengthy and painful experience, or physically painful, but actually if you've gone out your way to make this easy for me, that is often a really key driver of loyalty and overall outcome. But ultimately, they want the ailment fixed, right? So that's kind of the ultimate outcome.
Okay. Liz, I don't know if you have any final thoughts, or I think we're about 11:15 coming up very soon. So Jade will be turning us all off. Do you have any final thoughts, Liz, on that?
I think we just also need to be mindful that the whole system is not quite back where it was pre-COVID. We do not have all the consultants back doing the full scope of private practice yet. We're nearly there, but consultants returning to private practice, as Finn's research illustrated, there has been a bit of a lag in some specialties particularly, and you talked at the very beginning, Ted, about the barriers to growth. We talked about staffing, and there is a limit to how much more efficient you can become, and how you can adapt pathways operationally. So I think the capacity issue and the staffing issue we need to bear in mind for the future.
Thanks very much. Thanks to all the speakers, Liz, Will, and Chris. Thanks to Jade for organizing all this, and thanks to all of you for coming and joining us. As you see, the recording and the slide deck will be sent to you all by end of tomorrow, I'm guessing. So, and if anyone has any questions, you're welcome to email any of us, I think, on the panel and to follow up. So it leaves me to say thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.